I'm Lila, and I am going to tell you a little bit about what Camphill can offer gap year volunteers. And I want to emphasize that word volunteer. Perhaps a little bit like Lars. It's funny to follow on Lars. We have a lot in common. But I will tell you a little bit more about Camphill. We do not charge for gap year experiences in Camphill. We also provide free room and board, and we have a modest monthly stipend and a host of other benefits as well. Next slide, please. Oh, you already got there. Okay, good. So what is Camphill? We're an 80-year-old network of independent nonprofit communities and schools around the world, but I'm focusing here in North America. And we serve people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities like autism and Down syndrome. And together we co-create full and meaningful lives for everyone in Camphill. Most of our communities rely on volunteers, so that's like short-term gappers, and then long-term staff who might be spending 5 or 10 years in Camphill for their entire lives, like raising their children. A lot of people do that and then they retire in Camphill. And yeah, I mean, that's a big part of the model that makes Camphill really unique. Can you go to the next slide, Jonathan? Thank you. So what else makes Camphill unique? And that next slide. So that's starting with the authentic relationships. And so really, like, when you live and work in community, you really just have to be yourself, because you can't like separate these different parts of who you are. And so I'll go into that a little bit more on the next slide so we can just enjoy a pretty picture instead of stuff on the screen. Oh, can you go back up? Sorry, to the one with the nice picture. There we go. Thanks. So yeah, the folks that we support are like really good at this. Like, they're great models, they're great teachers for what it is to just be authentic and to kind of live from your heart. And then also everyone in Camphill contributes to sustaining the communities. So everyone, goes to work, everyone does chores in the house, and then everyone's just consciously making an effort to bring joy to everyone in the community. And all of that really is the foundation for authentic and reciprocal relationships. The next slide. Thank you. So environmental stewardship, right? Caring for the earth, second to caring for people, it's a huge value in Camphill. And so that shows up in a few different ways. If you can go to the next slide. So the biggest one is regenerative agriculture. We practice biodynamic farming in Camphill, and the majority of our communities that take volunteers, because some of our communities are more employment-based and some are more of a hybrid and some are really focused on volunteers. So it's usually the ones that are very volunteer focused, that are on a lot of land, and they have biodynamic farms and gardens. And if you're not familiar with biodynamics, it's kind of like organic plus. And I'll tell you a little bit more if you go to the next slide. So, I mean, for one thing, the animals in biodynamic farming are just treated much better. Like, the calves are not separated from their moms. They get to drink their mom's milk instead of rehydrated powdered milk from China, which is a thing. The calves, we don't remove horns, pigs are not crated. Chickens roam the pastures. It's a much nicer life for the animals. And if you go to the next slide, you can see a photo of one of the gardens in one of our communities, and you can see just like how amazing the vegetables are. And that's not with using steroids or pesticides. That's really all about building up soil health. And so that, if you go to the next slide, feeds into another piece of Camphill, which is the healthy lifestyle. And I mean, for the most part, it's pretty obvious, right? Next slide. So the food, right? That's the first thing. The food in Camphill is completely amazing. In the growing season, it's like fresh farm to table. And then, I mean, it's also just an active lifestyle. You live really close to nature. You have all the health benefits of community. And then there's a really strong emphasis on creativity, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about. So arts are huge in Camphill. If you go to the next slide, you can see a photo from one of our felting workshops. We also have weaveries, wood shops, ceramics, bookbinding, and even more than that. And then also performing arts are really big. So music, drama, dance. A lot of the communities, at least before the pandemic, would host like monthly professional musicians would come into the communities, and it would be like a nice thing that was open up to neighbors in the larger community. And we're all looking forward to getting back to that. And then the next thing is really that we foster an environment where everyone can thrive. Like it's really about having people explore their gifts and kind of really giving room for people to grow. And so that is, of course, like our approach to working with people with disabilities, but really everyone benefits from that. You know, our long-term folks are trained in kind of this approach to working with people with disabilities, but then, yeah, it just spills out to everybody, which is really just a beautiful thing in Camphill. Oh, and I should have said next slide, but it's just a nice little picture from Camphill School. And then, oh, so I was just going to really briefly talk about compensation because I mentioned like the long-term folks, right? So when I mentioned what short-term folks get, but then basically in Camphill, we try to meet everybody's needs, knowing that everybody has different needs. So like I said, people raise their kids in Camphill. Obviously, they're not doing that on the same kind of budget that a gap year person is working out of, but that way it's like everyone's really on equal footing and they're just taking what they need and kind of leaving the rest for everyone else so that everyone gets what they need. And it's kind of a magical approach because it means that we have a really comfortable lifestyle in Camphill. And then really quickly, I will just show you where we have communities in North America on the next slide. And so we have a bunch in New York and Pennsylvania. We're pretty well clustered in the Northeast, but you can see we have a few on the West Coast, including in Vancouver and on Vancouver Island outside of Victoria, and then Minnesota, and even a community in New Orleans, which is a school. And last thing that's really important is this question of who does well in Camphill. So life in Camphill really is magical. Like it's as beautiful as it looks. It's as idyllic as it looks. And it's also really not easy. Am I running out of time? Sorry. Okay. So I guess you can just see those things up there, but it really requires a lot of like emotional health and really just having a service, an orientation towards service.